Welcome, friends. Tonight we drift back to a quieter world, long before cities and sugar factories, before vending machines and gas station snacks. In this world, food wasn't packaged in plastic or sold in aisles. It was foraged, prepared, shared, and deeply rooted in the land itself. Across river valleys, forests, and plains, Native American communities created rich snack traditions, sweet treats made from honey, roasted nuts, and mashed berries, savory bites from smoked fish and slow-stewed beans. These were not feasts, but everyday comforts, foods passed between children, traded between neighbors, or prepared for long journeys and sacred ceremonies. Tonight, we'll follow these small moments, the quiet clatter of acorn shells, the soft hiss of meat smoking near a stream, and the warmth of cornbread beside a fire. These aren't scenes of war or conquest, they're scenes of survival, joy, and flavor, carried from hand to hand across generations. So settle in and let the calm rhythms of the past carry you away. This is the story of Native American snacks and the people who made them with care.
Dawn at the village, the start of a snack-filled day. The first light of dawn is not a sudden event. It is a slow, gentle washing of gray over the deep, star-filled black of the night sky. In the village, nestled beside a winding river and cradled by an immense forest, the world is still quiet. The air is cool and damp, carrying the scent of wet earth, pine needles, and the faint, clean smell of river water. The only sounds are the last calls of a night bird and the soft rustle of leaves in a breeze that seems to be waking up with the world. Inside a lodge, perhaps a longhouse of the Haudenosaunee in the northeast, or a sturdy earth lodge of the Mandan on the plains, or a cedar plank house of the Pacific Northwest, the transition from sleep to wakefulness is just as gradual. There is no jarring alarm, no sudden rush. There is only the slow awareness of the light changing outside, the gentle stirring of family members, and the quiet knowledge that a new day has begun. Soon, a soft sound joins the morning chorus. It is the sound of someone tending to the fire. The embers from the previous night are carefully uncovered, their faint orange glow a small pocket of warmth in the cool morning air. Small, dry twigs are added, and with a gentle breath, they catch fire, crackling softly. The flames grow, casting flickering shadows on the walls. With the fire comes the first promise of warmth and food. And with the fire comes the first scent of the day's cooking. It's not the smell of a hurried breakfast, but something more elemental. It is the smell of corn. Perhaps it is being parched, a process of dry roasting the kernels to make them brittle and easy to grind. The aroma is nutty, toasty, and deeply comforting. It speaks of harvest, of storage, and of sustenance that will last through the day and the seasons. Another scent begins to mingle with the corn. From a small clay pot set near the coals, a rich, buttery aroma begins to rise. Pine nuts, gathered from the forest floor weeks ago, are being gently roasted. The heat coaxes the natural oils from the nuts, and their fragrance fills the small space, a perfume of the deep woods. This is the beginning of the day's snack preparation. Food in these communities was not always structured into 3 rigid meals. Life was fluid, and work, be it hunting, farming, foraging, or crafting, required energy throughout the day. And so, from the very start of the morning, portable, durable, and flavorful foods were being prepared. These were the snacks that would be tucked into a small pouch for a long walk, eaten by children as they played, or shared among friends during a quiet moment of rest. The village slowly comes to life. The sound of a grinding stone begins. a rhythmic, scraping sound of stone against stone as the parched corn is turned into a fine meal. The river whispers its constant song. The birds are now in full voice, greeting the sun as it finally crests the horizon. Its golden light filtering through the trees. The day has begun, not with a rush, but with the peaceful, deliberate creation of the simple foods that will fuel it. The air is full of the promise of toasted corn, roasted nuts, and a day lived in harmony with the rhythms of the earth.
Fried corn cakes, golden, crispy, and filling. The sound of the grinding continues, a steady and meditative rhythm that is one of the foundational sounds of the village. A woman kneels before a metate, a large flat stone with a slight depression worn into its surface from generations of use. In her hands, she holds a smaller, smooth stone, a mano. With a steady back and forth motion, she grinds the hard, parched corn kernels into a fine, pale yellow powder. The work is slow and deliberate, a physical meditation that transforms the hard gift of the harvest into something soft and useful. The cornmeal accumulates, a small mountain of fragrant dust. It smells sweet, earthy, and sun-baked. She gathers the meal into a shallow bowl, carved from a single piece of wood. To this, she adds a small amount of water from a clay jug, mixing it with her hands. The dry powder transforms again, becoming a soft, pliable dough. She might add a pinch of salt, harvested from a distant salt lick, or perhaps some finely crushed nut meats for richness and flavor. The dough is now ready. She pulls off a small piece and rolls it between her palms, flattening it into a small, round disc. It's a simple, imperfect circle, the size of her hand. Over the open fire, a flat, smooth stone has been heating for some time. It is a natural griddle. With a small piece of animal fat, perhaps bear or deer, she greases the hot surface, which sizzles and sends up a small puff of fragrant smoke. Gently, she lays the corn cake onto the hot stone. The moment it touches the surface, there is a satisfying sizzle. The wet dough immediately begins to cook, its edges turning a beautiful golden brown. Small bubbles may appear on the surface as the water inside turns to steam, making the cake light and airy. The smell is intoxicating. The scent of toasting corn intensified, warm and delicious. She watches it patiently, using a small stick to lift the edge and check its progress. There is no rush. The fire dictates the pace. After a few minutes, when one side is perfectly crispy and browned, she flips it. The other side now begins to cook, its soft surface meeting the intense heat of the stone. When it is done, the corn cake is a simple masterpiece. The outside is wonderfully crispy, offering a slight crunch as you bite into it, but the inside remains soft, steamy, and tender, with the wholesome, slightly sweet flavor of pure corn. It is incredibly filling, a perfect packet of energy. These cakes, known by many names in many nations, like the Johnny cakes of some eastern tribes, or similar griddle cakes found throughout the Americas, were the ultimate convenience food. They could be made quickly in the morning and eaten right away, hot and fresh. Or they could be cooked in a large batch, allowed to cool, and then stacked. They were durable and portable, easily tucked into a pouch for a hunter to eat on the trail, or for a farmer to enjoy during a break in the fields. It was a simple, versatile, and deeply satisfying snack, born from the sacred grain that sustained so many.
Berry preserves, nature's sweet and tangy gift. Imagine a day in late summer. The sun is high and warm, and the air is alive with the gentle buzzing of insects. The work of the day is foraging, a quiet and observant task. A small group moves through the sun-dappled undergrowth, their eyes trained to spot the vibrant jewels of color hanging from bushes and vines. they are gathering berries. There are wild blueberries, small and dusty blue, bursting with a sweet, mild flavor. There are blackberries, dark and plump, their taste a perfect balance of sweet and tart. Perhaps there are raspberries, delicate and fragrant, or tart red chokecherries, which pucker the mouth when eaten raw, but transform into something wonderful when cooked. The gathering is a peaceful activity. The only sounds are the soft plinking of berries dropping into a woven basket, the rustle of leaves, and the quiet conversation of the gatherers. Each berry is a small gift from the land, a burst of concentrated sunshine and summer rain. Back in the village, the baskets are emptied, their contents a beautiful mosaic of red, blue, and black. The preservation process begins. The berries are placed in a large, shallow vessel, perhaps a hollowed-out log or a wide clay bowl. Using a smooth stone or a wooden mallet, they are gently mashed. The process releases their juices, a cascade of vibrant color and sweet, summery fragrance. The air fills with the scent of crushed fruit. To sweeten it further, a drizzle of maple syrup or a piece of honeycomb might be stirred into the pot. This adds another layer of flavor, the woody notes of maple or the floral sweetness of honey, and also helps in the preservation. The sugars act as a natural preservative, allowing the bounty of summer to be enjoyed deep into the winter. As it cooks down, the mixture becomes thick, glossy, and deep in color. A spoonful of this preserve is a taste of pure summer. It is sweet, but with a lingering tartness from the wild fruit. It's a perfect accompaniment to the simple foods of the day. A dollop could be spread on a warm corn cake, its sweet and tangy flavor cutting through the earthy taste of the corn. It could be mixed with parched corn and nuts to create a type of energy bar, known in some cultures as pemmican, though often made with meat and fat as well. The simple act of mashing and simmering fruit was a way of capturing fleeting perfection. It transformed perishable berries into a long-lasting, versatile, and delicious snack. A sweet and tangy reminder of the sun-drenched days of summer, ready to be enjoyed on a cold winter morning.
Pine nut treats, the crunch of the forest. Let us travel now to the high, arid landscapes of the Great Basin or the Southwest, where the pinyon pine tree stands, gnarled and resilient, against the vast blue sky. In the late autumn, the air grows crisp, and the pine cones of these special trees begin to open, revealing the precious nuts tucked within their scales. The pine nut harvest is a time of communal effort and celebration, a gathering of a food that is both a staple and a delicacy. The process begins with a long walk into the hills. Families would travel to their traditional harvesting grounds, the air smelling of dry earth, sagebrush, and the sharp, clean scent of pine. The cones are gathered, sometimes knocked from the branches with long poles, other times collected from the ground where squirrels and other animals have left their caches. Back at the camp, a fire is built. The collected cones are placed in a shallow pit with hot embers and covered with earth. This gentle, slow roasting serves two purposes. It imparts a wonderfully toasted, nutty flavor to the nuts inside, and it causes the scales of the cone to open fully, making the nuts easy to extract. The smell of roasting pine fills the entire area, a warm, rich, and comforting perfume. Once roasted, the cones are broken apart and the small, dark-shelled nuts are collected. Now comes the patient work of shelling. Each small nut is cracked, often with the teeth or between two smooth stones, to reveal the creamy, ivory-colored kernel inside. It is meticulous work, often done in a group, accompanied by stories and conversation. A freshly shelled pine nut, still warm from the roasting, is a true delight. It has a soft, yielding crunch and a flavor that is rich, buttery, and slightly sweet with a resinous hint of the pine tree itself. They are incredibly energy-dense, packed with protein and healthy fats, making them a perfect, high-powered snack. A handful of roasted pine nuts is a snack in its purest form. Simple, delicious, and deeply nourishing. They could be carried in a small pouch and eaten on their own throughout the day, providing a quick boost of energy during a long hunt or a day of work. But their use did not end there. The nuts were often ground into a fine, oily meal. This pine nut flour could be mixed with cornmeal to enrich breads and cakes, lending them a moist texture and a wonderfully nutty flavor. Sometimes the ground nuts were mixed with a little water to form a thick, rich paste, a sort of pine nut butter. This could be spread on bread or simply eaten with a finger, a creamy and satisfying treat. In some traditions, the whole nuts were mixed with dried berries and a little honey or syrup, then formed into small cakes and left to dry. These were some of the earliest energy bars, a perfect combination of fat, protein, and carbohydrates. The crunch of the forest, as found in the humble pine nut, was a versatile and treasured snack, a concentrated taste of the wild, rugged land from which it came. Wild game jerky, savory and portable. The success of a hunt was a momentous occasion for any village. Whether it was a buffalo on the Great Plains, a deer or elk in the eastern woodlands, or a moose in the northern forests, the animal provided not just meat for immediate feasts, but also the raw material for one of the most important snack foods of all, jerky. Jerky was the ultimate food for travelers, hunters, and warriors. It was lightweight, packed with protein, and resistant to spoilage. Its creation was a testament to the ingenuity of people who understood how to preserve the bounty of a successful hunt for weeks or even months. The process began soon after the animal was brought back. The best cuts of meat, lean and free of fat, were set aside for jerky. The meat was sliced into long, thin, uniform strips, a task requiring a sharp flint or obsidian knife and a steady hand. The thinner the slice, the more quickly and evenly it would dry. These strips of meat were then prepared for drying. In many cultures, they were simply hung as they were, allowing the natural flavor of the game to be the star. In other traditions, the meat was first treated to enhance its flavor and aid in preservation. It might be dipped in a brine made from salt, if available, or rubbed with a mixture of dried herbs and spices. Sometimes it was lightly smoked before drying, which added another layer of flavor and protection against spoilage. The drying itself was a slow and patient process that relied on the power of the sun and the air. The strips of meat were draped over wooden racks or hung from lines, exposed to the open air, but protected from insects and scavenging animals. On a hot, dry, sunny day, the wind would do most of the work, wicking the moisture away from the meat. The strips would slowly shrink and darken, becoming stiff and hard. Another method was to dry the meat over a very low, smoky fire. A small, smoldering fire of fragrant hardwoods like hickory or mesquite would be built, and the meat would be hung on a rack high above it. The gentle heat would slowly dehydrate the meat, while the smoke infused it with a deep, savory, and aromatic flavor. This smoke also acted as an excellent preservative. The final product was a strip of jerky. It was tough and leathery to the touch. To eat it, you would tear off a piece and chew it slowly. At first, it would be hard, but as you chewed, it would soften, rehydrating with the moisture in your mouth and releasing its intense, concentrated flavor. It tasted of the wild animal it came from, be it the rich, gamey flavor of venison or the deep, beefy taste of buffalo, enhanced by salt or the subtle perfume of wood smoke. This was not a snack to be eaten quickly. It was a food to be savored.
its long-lasting chew providing a slow release of energy and satisfaction. A few strips of jerky in a pouch were enough to sustain a person for a long day's journey. A savory, portable, and essential link to the life-giving hunt.
Cornbread and beans, staples transformed into snacks. Corn and beans. Alongside squash, they form the Three Sisters, the sacred triumvirate of agriculture for many Native American peoples. While they were the foundation of hearty meals, they were also transformed into simple, satisfying snacks that could be eaten on the go or during a quiet pause in the day's work. Let's first consider the cornbread. This was not the light, sweet, cake-like cornbread of modern times. It was something far more fundamental. Made from ground cornmeal, water, and perhaps a little ash from the fire to act as a leavening agent, the dough was dense and rustic. One common way to cook it was directly in the embers of the fire. A thick, round patty of dough would be carefully wrapped in large, fresh leaves, like corn husks or sycamore leaves, to protect it from the direct heat and ash. This small parcel was then buried in the hot ashes at the edge of the fire pit. It would bake slowly, the gentle, radiant heat cooking it all the way through. The leaves would steam the inside, keeping it moist, while imparting their own faint, earthy flavor. When it was done, the package was pulled from the ashes and unwrapped. The resulting bread was dense, heavy, and incredibly nourishing. It had a dark, crusty exterior and a moist, chewy interior. The flavor was intensely of corn, nutty, slightly sweet, and with a faint, pleasant smokiness from the fire. A piece of this ash bread was a meal in itself, a solid and comforting snack. Now imagine carrying this with beans. Beans were often cooked for hours in a clay pot, simmering slowly over the fire until they were perfectly tender. They weren't just boiled, they were seasoned. Wild onions, garlic, or other savory herbs gathered from the surrounding lands would be added to the pot, infusing the beans with a deep, aromatic flavor. Sometimes a small piece of smoked meat or animal fat was added for richness. The result was a thick, savory stew of beans. While it could be a main course, a small gourd bowl full of these warm, seasoned beans was also a perfect, hearty snack, especially on a cool day. It was warming, filling, and deeply satisfying. The ultimate snack combination was, of course, the two together. A thick slice of the dense, smoky cornbread used to scoop up the soft, savory beans. The textures and flavors were a perfect marriage. The firm, crumbly bread and the soft, creamy beans. The earthy taste of the corn and the savory, herbaceous flavor of the beans. It was a simple, humble pairing, but one that provided complete protein and a wealth of nutrients. This was not just a snack. It was a small, perfect meal, a testament to the nourishing power of the Three Sisters, providing comfort and strength in every bite. Maple syrup and sweeteners, liquid gold in snacks. In the late winter, when the days begin to grow longer but the nights are still locked in a deep frost, a magical transformation occurs in the maple forests of the Northeast. The sap within the sugar maple trees begins to run, a clear, slightly sweet liquid that is the precursor to one of nature's most wondrous gifts, maple syrup. The process of gathering this sap was a quiet, patient ritual. A V-shaped cut would be made in the bark of a mature maple tree, and a small spout, or spile, made of wood or reed would be inserted. From this spout, the sap would begin to drip, slowly and steadily, into a birch bark or clay container placed at the base of the tree. The sound is one of the first signs of spring's approach, a gentle, rhythmic plink, 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 a watery heartbeat in the silent, snowy woods. Collecting the sap was only the beginning. In its raw form, it is mostly water with only a small percentage of sugar. To transform it into the thick, sweet syrup, the water had to be removed. This was done through a long, slow process of boiling. Large containers of sap were set over a fire, and for hours or even days, the liquid would simmer and steam, the water evaporating into the cool air. As the water boiled away, the sugar became concentrated and the liquid began to thicken and darken, turning from clear to a beautiful amber color. The air around the sugar camp would be filled with a unique, sweet, and slightly woody steam. The final product was a syrup that was truly liquid gold, intensely sweet, but with a complex flavor that spoke of the earth, the tree, and the wood smoke from the fire. This maple syrup was the primary sweetener for many tribes, and it was a key ingredient in turning simple foods into special treats. It was in essence the sauce and topping for a wide variety of native snacks. A drizzle of warm maple syrup over a freshly cooked corn cake would transform it from a simple staple into a decadent dessert. The sweet, woody flavor would soak into the porous bread, creating a delightful contrast with the earthy corn. Roasted nuts, like walnuts, hickory nuts, or butternuts, could be tossed in maple syrup and then gently heated again until the syrup crystallized, creating a sweet, crunchy candy. This was a beloved treat, especially for children. It could be stirred into mashed berries to create a sweeter, more complex preserve. Or it could be mixed with ground corn and nuts to bind them together into energy-rich travel cakes. Some cultures even boiled the syrup down further until it crystallized into hard maple sugar, which could be stored easily and used throughout the year, a portable and long-lasting source of sweetness. Maple syrup was more than just a sweetener. It was a seasonal gift, a product of patience and a deep understanding of the forest's cycles. It was a touch of luxury, a way to add a bit of joy and celebration to the simple, wholesome snacks of everyday life. Sunflower seeds and squash seeds, small but mighty snacks. In the heat of late summer and early autumn, the fields and gardens cultivated by many tribes were a vibrant spectacle of color and life. Alongside the tall stalks of corn and the sprawling vines of beans, two other plants stood out: the proud, tall sunflower, its heavy head following the path of the sun, and the humble squash, its large leaves shading the ripening gourds on the ground below. Both of these plants offered not just their primary harvest, but also a secondary and equally treasured crop, their seeds. The harvesting of sunflower seeds was a careful task. When the great flower head drooped, heavy with its tightly packed treasure, it was cut from the stalk. The head was then rubbed vigorously, often between the hands or against a rough surface, to dislodge the hundreds of black and white striped seeds. Similarly, when a squash was cut open for its sweet orange flesh, the stringy pulp in its center cavity was carefully scraped out. This pulp was a tangled web holding dozens of smooth, flat, pale green or white seeds. These seeds were separated from the pulp and washed, then laid out to dry in the sun on a flat basket or a hide. Once dried, these seeds, sunflower and squash alike, were ready to be turned into one of the simplest and most satisfying snacks imaginable. A shallow clay dish or a flat stone would be placed near the fire, and the seeds would be spread across it in a single layer. They were then gently toasted, stirred frequently with a small stick to ensure they cooked evenly and didn't burn. As they heated, a wonderful nutty aroma would fill the air. The sunflower seeds would become fragrant and their shells slightly brittle. The squash seeds would puff up slightly, becoming light and crispy. Sometimes a little salt would be sprinkled over them as they roasted, if it was available. Eating these roasted seeds was a simple, almost meditative act. You would take a small handful. A sunflower seed would be placed between the teeth, cracked open with a satisfying snap, the shell discarded, and the small rich kernel eaten. A roasted squash seed could be eaten whole, shell and all, providing a delightful, airy crunch.
The flavor was subtle but deeply rewarding, nutty, slightly sweet, and toasty. They were a perfect snack for idle moments, for sharing during a conversation, or for carrying in a small pouch to be eaten one by one throughout the day. But their use extended beyond simple snacking. The seeds, rich in oil and protein, could also be ground into a fine meal. This seed meal could be added to cornmeal to make breads and cakes richer and more flavorful. It could also be mixed with water to create a thick, nutritious paste or even a kind of butter. Sunflower seed meal in particular could be used to thicken soups and stews, adding a nutty flavor and creamy texture. These small but mighty seeds were a perfect example of the philosophy of using every part of the harvest. Nothing was wasted. From the grandest flower and the largest gourd came these tiny, nourishing snacks, a testament to the quiet, abundant generosity of the earth.
Wild herbs and spices, adding flavor to simple snacks. The landscape was not just a source of staples like corn, beans, and game. It was also a vast and varied spice cabinet. The forests, meadows, and riverbanks were home to a wide array of plants whose leaves, roots, and flowers could transform a simple snack from mere sustenance into a flavorful and aromatic experience. The knowledge of these plants was a form of culinary art, passed down through generations. Imagine a quiet walk through the woods, not for a major harvest, but for the subtle act of gathering flavors. Fingers might brush against a patch of wild mint growing in a damp, shady spot, releasing its cool, sharp, and refreshing scent into the air. A few leaves would be plucked and tucked into a basket. Further on, near a sun-drenched clearing, the familiar, pungent aroma of wild onion or garlic might be detected. The small bulbs would be carefully dug from the earth, their sharp, savory flavor promising to liven up any dish. In other regions, one might find the gray-green fuzzy leaves of sagebrush, its scent deeply herbaceous and evocative of the dry, open plains. These herbs and many others, like wild bergamot with its citrusy, floral notes, or the spicy kick of wild ginger root, were the seasonings of the native kitchen. They were used both fresh and dried. To preserve them, bunches of herbs were hung upside down in a dry, airy place away from the direct sun. Once completely dry, the leaves would be crumbled between the palms, releasing their concentrated fragrance, and stored in a small pouch or clay pot. The application of these flavors was subtle and masterful. A pinch of crumbled dried mint could be kneaded into the dough for corn cakes, adding a surprising and refreshing note to the earthy bread. The bread would not taste overtly of mint, but it would have a hint of something bright and cool, a subtle complexity. Savory herbs like wild onion and garlic were essential for flavoring meats and beans. When preparing jerky, the thin strips of meat might be rubbed with a mixture of these dried powdered herbs before being set out to dry, infusing the final product with a deep savory flavor that went beyond simple salt or smoke. When beans were simmered for hours over the fire, a few wild onion bulbs tossed into the pot would transform them from plain to delicious. Even beverages could be considered a form of liquid snack. A handful of fresh mint leaves or dried raspberry leaves steeped in hot water created a fragrant, calming tea that could be enjoyed at any time of day, a gentle pick-me-up or a soothing evening drink. These wild herbs and spices were the finishing touches, the small details that demonstrated a deep and intimate connection with the land. They showed that food was not just about calories and survival, but also about pleasure, aroma, and the joy of creating something truly delicious from the simple gifts of the earth. They were the invisible ingredients that gave each region's snacks their own unique and memorable character.
Acorn bread and mush, ancient staples. Long before the widespread cultivation of corn, one of the most ancient and important food sources for many native peoples, especially in places like California and the eastern woodlands, was the humble acorn. The oak tree, a symbol of strength and endurance, provided a bountiful and reliable harvest that, with careful processing, could be transformed into a nourishing and versatile food. The acorn harvest in the autumn was a major community event. People would gather under the great oak trees, collecting the fallen nuts in large baskets. But unlike pine nuts, acorns could not be eaten raw. They are full of bitter tannins, which are not only unpalatable, but also interfere with digestion. The genius of the acorn eaters was in the development of a process to remove these tannins, leaching. The leaching process was a patient and water-intensive ritual. The acorns were first shelled, and the nut meats were ground into a fine, sandy meal, often using a stone mortar and pestle. This meal was then placed in a shallow, cloth-lined basin of sand near a stream or river. Water, either cold river water or gently heated water, was then poured over the meal again and again. As the water percolated through the ground acorn meal, it carried the bitter tannins away with it. The process was repeated for hours until a taste of the meal revealed that all the bitterness was gone, leaving behind a mild, nutty, and slightly sweet flour. The sound of the water, the patient pouring and waiting, was the sound of transformation, turning a bitter nut into a life-sustaining food. This leached acorn flour was the base for several simple but essential dishes. One of the most common was acorn mush. The flour was mixed with water in a tightly woven, waterproof basket. To cook it, heated stones were plucked from a fire with wooden tongs and dropped directly into the mixture. The stones would sizzle and hiss, instantly heating the mush. They were stirred constantly to prevent scorching, and as one stone cooled, it was replaced with a fresh, hot one. The resulting mush was a thick, smooth, and gelatinous porridge with a warm, earthy brown color. Its flavor was mild, nutty, and deeply comforting. Eaten warm from a small bowl, it was a nourishing and easily digestible snack or meal, a food that felt ancient and grounding. This leached acorn flour could also be used to make bread. It was mixed with little water to form a thick, heavy dough, which was then shaped into patties. These patties were often baked in the same way as cornbread, wrapped in leaves and buried in the hot ashes of a fire. The resulting bread was dense, dark, and moist, with a rich, nutty flavor that was entirely different from corn. A piece of this bread was a substantial and long-lasting snack, providing slow-release energy for the day's tasks. It was a food born of deep knowledge and patience, a testament to the ability to turn a challenging resource into a cornerstone of the diet.
Nuts and berries at play. Children's snack culture. The world of a child in a native village was one of immense freedom and constant learning. From a very young age, children were not confined to indoor spaces, but were part of the fabric of the village in the surrounding landscape. And as they played, they learned the most important lessons of all, the rhythms of nature and the sources of food. Their snacking was an integral part of this education. Imagine a group of children playing a game of tag among the trees at the edge of the village. Their play is punctuated by small, spontaneous acts of foraging. A child might spot a patch of wild strawberries, tiny red jewels hiding under their leaves. The game pauses for a moment as they all gather around, plucking the sweet, fragrant berries and popping them directly into their mouths, their fingers and chins becoming stained with red juice. This wasn't a formal lesson. No adult was standing over them, pointing and naming. They learned by watching the older children, by observing what the adults gathered, and by simple, joyful experience. They learned which berries were sweet and which were sour, which nuts were ready to be cracked and which plants were best left alone. In the autumn, as hickory nuts and walnuts began to fall, the children's play would move to the groves of these trees. They would carry small stones with them, and when they found a good nut, they would sit for a moment, place the nut on a larger, flat rock, and crack it open. The effort of cracking the hard shell was rewarded with the prize of the rich, oily nut meat inside. This was a snack that required a little bit of work, teaching them a small lesson in patience and reward. The landscape was their playground and their pantry. A walk along the river might yield a handful of sweet, tart wild grapes. A run through a meadow could lead to the discovery of gooseberries or currants. This constant casual snacking was a form of grazing, a way of staying energized throughout a long day of play and exploration. This children's snack culture was a beautiful and organic system of education. It instilled in them a deep, personal map of their environment. They knew the location of the best berry patches, the tree that produced the sweetest nuts, and the time of year when each would be ready. They learned the names of the plants not from a book, but from their taste and texture. The snacks they ate were fresh, seasonal, and immediate. A handful of berries, a cracked nut, a tender young cattail shoot pulled from the edge of the pond. It was a diet that was perfectly attuned to their surroundings. This is how the deep knowledge of foraging was passed down, not through formal instruction, but through the simple, joyful, and delicious acts of everyday life and play.
Wild fruit snacks: figs, plums, and chokecherries. Beyond the familiar world of berries, the vast and varied landscapes of North America offered a wide array of other wild fruits, each with its own unique season, flavor, and texture. These fruits provided seasonal bursts of sweetness and variety, and were enjoyed both fresh from the tree and preserved for later use. In the warmer, more arid regions of the Southwest and California, one might find the wild fig, or the fruit of certain cacti like the prickly pear. The prickly pear fruit, called a tuna, was a brilliant magenta jewel protected by a formidable skin of tiny, sharp spines. Gathering them required great care, often using tongs made of wood. Once the spines were carefully scraped or burned off, the fruit could be peeled to reveal a sweet, juicy flesh filled with crunchy seeds. It tasted like a cross between a watermelon and a cucumber, a wonderfully refreshing treat in a hot and dry land. In the woodlands and plains, wild plum trees would produce a bounty of small, tart, and intensely flavorful fruits in late summer. They were smaller and more sour than their cultivated cousins, but their flavor was concentrated and wild. Eaten fresh, they were a burst of sweet and sour juice. They were a favorite snack, and their vibrant flavor was a sign that autumn was approaching. One of the most significant wild fruits in many regions was the chokecherry. These small, dark red fruits grew in clusters and were known for their powerfully astringent, mouth-puckering tartness when eaten raw. The name itself is a warning. However, native peoples knew the secret to unlocking their potential. When cooked or pounded and dried, the tannins that caused the astringency would break down, and a deep, rich, and complex cherry flavor would emerge. The processing of chokecherries was often a communal activity. The harvested cherries, including the pits, were spread out on a hide and pounded into a pulp with stone mallets. The pits, when crushed, added a hint of almond-like flavor from the kernel inside. This thick, dark red paste was then formed into small, flat patties and laid out on racks to dry in the sun. The resulting chokecherry cakes were a staple food. They were hard and dense and would last for months, if not years. To eat them, a piece would be broken off and chewed slowly, or it could be rehydrated by soaking it in water to create a thick, flavorful sauce or drink. This sauce was a perfect accompaniment to roasted meat, its tartness cutting through the richness of the fat. From the sweet persimmons of the southeast that were only edible after the first frost, to the tart crabapples of the north, these wild fruits were seasonal highlights. They were eaten fresh, a fleeting and joyful snack, or they were mashed, pounded, and dried, their flavors concentrated and preserved, a tangy and delicious taste of summer to brighten a long winter day.
Fish snacks, smoked and dried from rivers and lakes. For the tribes living along the vast coastlines of the Pacific and Atlantic, or near the great inland rivers and lakes, fish were a cornerstone of life. The annual salmon runs of the Northwest, the cod fisheries of the Northeast, and the abundant fish of the Great Lakes provided a rich and reliable source of protein. While much of the catch was eaten fresh, a significant portion was preserved to be eaten as a convenient, savory snack. The most iconic of these fish snacks was, of course, smoked fish. The process was both an art and a science, a way of preserving the fish while infusing it with incredible flavor. After a successful catch, the fish would be cleaned and prepared. Larger fish, like salmon, would be filleted, their backbones removed, and the flesh scored to allow the smoke to penetrate deeply. Smaller fish might be left whole. The fish were then hung on racks inside a smokehouse, a structure designed to hold a low, smoldering fire. The choice of wood for the fire was crucial, as it determined the final flavor of the fish. Older wood, common in the Pacific Northwest, imparted a delicate, slightly sweet smokiness that was perfect for salmon. In other regions, hickory or other hardwoods might be used. For days, the fish would hang in the cool, dense smoke. The smoke acted as an antimicrobial agent, preventing spoilage, while the gentle heat slowly dehydrated the fish. The flesh would gradually turn a beautiful golden or deep reddish brown, and its surface would become firm and glossy with rendered oils. The air from miles around would carry the rich, appetizing aroma of wood smoke and curing fish. The finished product was a piece of smoked fish that was a true delicacy. It could be eaten as is, torn into strips. The flesh would be firm, slightly chewy, and flaky, and the flavor was a perfect symphony of the natural taste of the fish, the salt from a brine if used, and the deep, aromatic perfume of the wood smoke. It was a savory, oily, and intensely satisfying snack. Another common method of preservation was simply sun drying. Fish would be cleaned, sliced thinly, and hung on racks in the hot sun and wind. This method was common in drier climates. The resulting dried fish was very hard and lightweight, making it an excellent travel food. It could be chewed on like jerky, or it could be reconstituted in stews and soups. In some cultures, fish were also pounded into a powder. Dried fish would be pulverized with a stone, creating a fine, protein-rich meal. This fish powder could be mixed with other foods like cornmeal, or used to thicken soups, adding a savory, umami flavor. A piece of smoked salmon, a strip of sun-dried cod, or a handful of tiny, crispy fried smelts. These were the junk foods of the coasts and rivers. They were salty, savory, and packed with flavor and energy. A portable taste of the immense bounty of the water.
Corn soup and stews, liquid snacks for energy. Not all snacks are solid. On a cold, damp day or during a long period of strenuous work, sometimes the most comforting and revitalizing snack is something warm, nourishing, and sipped from a bowl. Throughout the corn-growing regions of the Americas, thick corn-based soups and stews were a staple, often serving as a hearty, liquid snack to bridge the gap between larger meals. The heart of these soups was often hominy. Hominy is corn that has been treated with an alkaline substance, usually wood ash, in a process called nixtamalization. This process does something remarkable. It softens the tough outer hull of the corn kernel, making it easier to remove, but more importantly, it unlocks the niacin and other nutrients within the corn, making them more available for digestion. This ancient chemical process was key to preventing nutritional deficiencies in cultures that relied heavily on corn. To make a simple corn soup, these soft, swollen hominy kernels would be simmered for hours in a large clay pot over the fire. The pot would sit at the center of the lodge or the village, a communal source of warmth and nourishment. As the hominy cooked, it would release its starches, thickening the water into a rich, soupy broth. In its simplest form, this was the snack, a bowl of what might be called hominy grits or a simple corn porridge. It was warm, comforting, and easily digestible. The flavor was of pure, clean corn, with a slightly chewy texture from the whole kernels. It was the kind of food that warmed you from the inside out. But this simple base was often enhanced. A handful of dried beans might be tossed into the pot, adding protein and another layer of texture. Small pieces of leftover meat from a hunt, venison, rabbit, or turkey could be added, their savory flavors melting into the broth. Wild greens foraged from the nearby woods might be stirred in at the end, adding a fresh, slightly bitter counterpoint to the sweetness of the corn. In the Southwest, dried and powdered chili peppers might be added, creating a spicy, invigorating stew that would make you sweat, a welcome sensation on a cold day. The variations were endless, depending entirely on the season and what was available. This simmering pot was always ready. A hunter returning from the cold, a child coming in from play, or someone taking a break from weaving or pottery could simply ladle a small amount into a gourd or a clay bowl. It was not a formal meal, but a quick, revitalizing dip into the communal pot. It was a liquid snack that provided instant warmth, sustained energy, and the deep, comforting flavors of home. It was a bowl of pure, simple comfort, always waiting by the fire.
Wild honey and sweet treats from bee to bowl. In the vast, sprawling forests and meadows, long before sugarcane was introduced, nature provided its own potent and magical sweetener, wild honey. Finding a bee tree, a hollow tree where a colony of wild bees had built their hive, was a special and sometimes daring event, one that promised a reward of unparalleled sweetness. The discovery might be accidental, a hunter noticing the constant hum and flight path of bees leading to a hole high up in an old oak or maple. Or it could be the result of deliberate tracking, following a single bee back to its home. The gathering of the honey was a task that required courage, skill, and a deep respect for the powerful insects who created it. Smoke was often used to calm the bees. A smoldering torch of damp leaves or grass would be held near the entrance of the hive. The smoke would pacify the bees, making it safer to reach inside the hollow tree and retrieve the prize, the heavy, waxy combs dripping with golden, fragrant honey. The honeycomb itself was a treat. The beeswax, chewy and sweet from the honey it contained, could be chewed like a type of gum. But the real treasure was the liquid honey itself. It was strained from the combs, a thick, viscous, and often dark liquid, its color and flavor determined by the flowers the bees had visited. Wild honey from a forest of basswood and clover would be light and floral. Honey from a field of goldenrod in the late summer would be darker, with a richer, more complex taste. Unlike the single-note sweetness of maple syrup, wild honey carried the essence of 1,000 different blossoms, a liquid snapshot of the local ecology. This honey was a precious and relatively rare commodity, and it was used to create special treats. It was a snack enhancer of the highest order. A simple piece of ash-baked bread became a delicacy when a fingerful of thick, sticky honey was spread across its surface. It could be drizzled over a bowl of acorn mush or hominy porridge, adding a burst of intense floral sweetness. Nuts and seeds, freshly roasted, could be stirred into a pot of warm honey, creating a sweet and crunchy confection, a kind of primitive brittle or granola. Dried fruits like plums or berries could be reconstituted and preserved in honey, their tartness providing a perfect balance to the rich sweetness. It was a special treat, often reserved for children, for guests, or for ceremonial occasions. The sweetness of wild honey was a gift, a taste of the wild and untamed world. It was a flavor that was both intensely natural and profoundly magical. It was not an everyday snack food, but an occasional treasured delight, a golden link between the world of humans, the world of flowers, and the industrious, buzzing world of the bees.
Nuts and legumes, portable and nutritious. Energy for a long journey or a hard day's work needed to be compact, durable, and nutrient-dense. While jerky provided protein, another category of snacks was essential for providing fats and long-lasting carbohydrates, nuts and legumes. These were the original power bars and trail mixes, perfectly designed by nature for portability. The forests of North America were a treasure trove of nuts. We have spoken of the pinyon nut and the acorn, but the variety was immense. In the eastern woodlands, the hickory tree provided a nut that was famously sweet and rich, but notoriously difficult to crack. It required patience and a good stone. The black walnut offered a large, oily kernel with a unique, pungent, and earthy flavor. Butternuts, also called white walnuts, were milder and oilier still. And of course, there were chestnuts, which were often roasted in the embers of a fire until they were soft and sweet. The preparation for these nuts as a travel snack was simple. They would be harvested in the autumn, dried and shelled. The shelled nut meats would then be gently roasted, which enhanced their flavor and helped to preserve them. A handful of these roasted nuts, a mix of hickory, walnut, and chestnut, was a snack that provided a powerful punch of calories and fat, staving off hunger for hours. These nuts were often carried in a small, soft leather pouch tied to a belt. A traveler could simply reach in and grab a few, eating them as they walked without breaking their stride. The pouch kept them dry and secure, a personal, portable pantry. Alongside nuts, there were also wild legumes. While cultivated beans were a staple, the landscape offered other options. In some parts of the South, a wild groundnut or hog peanut grew on a vine. It produced small edible tubers underground that had a nutty, bean-like flavor when roasted. These roasted nuts and legumes were often combined. A pouch might contain a mix of roasted hickory nuts, dried berries, and pieces of parched corn. This was the original trail mix, a perfectly balanced blend of fats, sugars, and carbohydrates. Every handful provided a different combination of textures and flavors: the hard crunch of the corn, the rich crumble of the nut, and the chewy sweetness of the berry. This category of snack was all about practicality. There was no complex preparation, no cooking required on the trail. It was about forethought, the work of harvesting, shelling, and roasting done weeks or months before in anticipation of the need for a quick, reliable source of energy. It was the simple, brilliant solution to the problem of fueling the human body on the move. A handful of the forest's concentrated power.
Cooking techniques: open fire, baking, and roasting. The snacks we have been describing were brought to life through a masterful and intimate relationship with the most fundamental of all cooking tools: fire. The ability to control and manipulate fire allowed for a surprising variety of cooking techniques, each one imparting a different texture and flavor to the food. The simplest and most direct method was roasting over an open fire. A piece of meat or a whole fish could be skewered on a green stick and held over the flames. This was a fast method, creating a charred, crispy exterior while keeping the inside juicy. Smaller items, like seeds and nuts, were not exposed to the direct flame, but were parched in a shallow clay dish or on a flat stone set near the fire. A technique that relied on radiant heat for a gentle, even toasting. Baking was achieved without a formal oven. The earth itself became the oven. The most common method was ash baking. As we've seen with corn and acorn bread, a dough patty was wrapped in leaves and buried in the hot ashes and embers at the edge of a fire. The ashes provided a gentle, all-encompassing heat that baked the bread slowly and evenly, preventing it from burning while keeping the inside juicy. The resulting bread had a unique smoky flavor and a wonderful crust. A more complex form of baking involved a pit oven. A pit would be dug in the ground and lined with stones. A large fire was built in the pit, heating the stones to an extremely high temperature. Once the fire died down, the hot embers were swept out and the pit was lined with wet vegetation, like damp leaves or seaweed. The food, perhaps a large squash, a whole animal, or many parcels of food, was placed on this layer. It was then covered with more wet vegetation, and finally, the entire pit was sealed with earth. The food would then steam cook for many hours from the residual heat of the stones and the moisture from the leaves. This slow, gentle cooking made even the toughest foods tender and succulent. Stone griddling was the precursor to the frying pan. A large, flat stone was chosen for its ability to withstand heat without cracking. It was placed in the fire until it was uniformly hot, then pulled out and used as a cooking surface. Corn cakes, thin slices of meat, or even fish could be cooked quickly on this natural griddle, often with a little animal fat to prevent sticking. The direct contact with the superheated stone created a wonderful, crispy sear. And of course, there was smoking, a technique that was as much about preservation as it was about flavor. In a smokehouse or over a smoldering fire, the low heat and dense smoke would slowly cook and dehydrate food, infusing it with a deep aromatic flavor that was impossible to achieve any other way. These techniques, roasting, baking, griddling, and smoking, were all accomplished with a simple fire and the materials at hand: stones, earth, and leaves. They demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of heat and thermodynamics, a culinary science that allowed for the creation of a diverse and delicious array of snacks from the simplest of ingredients.
Trade snacks, exotic flavors from neighboring tribes. No village was an island. A vast and intricate network of trade routes crisscrossed the North American continent, connecting peoples from the Pacific to the Atlantic, from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. Along these routes traveled not just goods like flint, obsidian, shells, and pottery, but also ideas, stories, and of course, food. The exchange of food introduced new flavors and snacks, creating a kind of culinary diplomacy. Imagine a group of traders from a coastal tribe arriving in a village deep in the interior woodlands. After the formal greetings and ceremonies, the trade blankets are unrolled. The woodland people might offer fine deer hides and maple sugar. The coastal traders, in return, might offer something their hosts had never tasted: dried seaweed. The seaweed, harvested from the ocean and dried into thin, brittle sheets, was salty, savory, and full of a unique flavor of the sea known as umami. For an inland person, chewing on a piece of this salty, crispy snack was to taste the distant ocean itself. Another prized trade item from the coast was ulachan grease. The ulachan, or candlefish, is a small, incredibly oily fish from the Pacific Northwest. The rendered oil was a rich, pungent, and highly nutritious commodity that was traded far and wide. It was a semi-solid fat at room temperature and was transported in beautifully carved wooden boxes. A spoonful of this potent fishy oil could be used to dress other foods, or dried berries could be dipped into it for a high-energy snack, a treasured and exotic flavor for those living far from the source. A tribe from the plains, rich in buffalo, might trade packages of their finest jerky, or pemmican, a concentrated cake of pounded jerky, melted fat, and dried berries, with an agricultural tribe from the Mississippi Valley. In return, they would receive bags of parched corn or dried squash. The hunters would gain a valuable and storable carbohydrate, and the farmers would get a taste of the rich, gamey meat of the great herds. From the Southwest, traders might carry salt, harvested from ancient salt flats, and small bags of dried, powdered chili peppers. These items were lightweight but incredibly valuable. A pinch of true salt or a dash of fiery chili could transform the cooking of a northern tribe, introducing a level of seasoning they had never experienced. A corn cake dusted with chili powder became an entirely new and exciting snack. This exchange of trade snacks did more than just add variety to the diet. It was a way of connecting with distant peoples and distant ecologies. To eat a food from a faraway land was to partake in its story and its spirit. It broadened the culinary horizons and strengthened the social bonds that held the continent together, one exotic and delicious bite at a time. Gathering and foraging, the roots of snack culture. Before the fields were planted, before the hunt was organized, there was the simple, fundamental act of gathering. Foraging was the bedrock of the native food system, a daily and seasonal practice that provided a constant stream of snacks and ingredients. It was a quiet, meditative activity that required a deep,
encyclopedic knowledge of the land. This was not a random wandering through the woods hoping to stumble upon something edible. It was a deliberate and knowledgeable search. A forager's eyes were trained to see things an outsider would miss. The subtle curl of a fern fiddlehead in the spring, a sign of a tender and delicious vegetable snack. The specific pattern of leaves that indicated an underground tuber. The slight disturbance in the soil that might reveal the cache of a squirrel, a bonus of pre-gathered nuts. The tools for foraging were simple: a digging stick to unearth roots, a sharp flint knife to cut stems, and a woven basket or a leather pouch to carry the harvest. But the most important tool was the mind. A forager carried a complex mental map of their territory, a map that changed with the seasons. They knew the south-facing slope where the first berries would ripen. They knew the low-lying marsh where the cattails grew, their starchy roots a valuable source of food. They knew the specific oak tree that produced the sweetest, least bitter acorns. This knowledge was passed down not in classrooms, but in the field. Children learned by following their mothers and grandmothers, watching what they picked and what they ignored. They learned the names of plants by tasting them. They learned the calendar of the earth by observing the life cycle of the plants around them. The snacks that came from foraging were often the freshest and most immediate. A handful of sweet wood sorrel, with its pleasant tartness, eaten right on the spot. A tender young milkweed shoot, boiled quickly to remove its bitterness, eaten like asparagus. The crisp, watery stalk of a wild onion pulled from the damp earth. Gathering was the foundation of what we've been calling snack culture. It provided the berries for the preserves, the nuts for roasting, the herbs for seasoning, and the roots for supplementing meals. It was a constant, low-level food acquisition strategy that ensured there was always something to eat, even if it was just a small, flavorful root or a handful of seeds. This deep relationship with the plant world fostered a sense of gratitude and respect. One did not take more than was needed. One often left an offering in return. Gathering was not just about taking from the land. It was a conversation with it. It was the quiet, daily rhythm that sustained life, one handful at a time.
Food and ceremony. Snacks for rituals and celebrations. Food was never just about physical sustenance. It was deeply woven into the spiritual and ceremonial life of every community. For special occasions, be it a harvest festival, a coming-of-age ritual, a wedding, or a spiritual ceremony, special foods and snacks were prepared, their ingredients and preparation imbued with symbolic meaning. These ceremonial snacks were often elevated versions of everyday foods. The finest, whitest cornmeal might be reserved for making a special bread to be shared during a naming ceremony. This bread might be sweetened with a generous amount of maple syrup or honey, a symbol of the sweet hopes for the child's future. It might be shaped in a particular way or colored with natural dyes from berries or flowers, making it visually distinct and sacred. The green corn ceremony, celebrated by many agricultural tribes in the southeast, was a major festival of renewal and thanksgiving for the corn harvest. No one was permitted to eat the new corn until the ceremony was complete. As part of the ritual, special corn dishes were prepared from the first ears of the harvest. A sacred corn soup or a special kind of corn cake would be prepared by designated individuals and shared among all the community members. Eating this first taste of the new corn together was a powerful act of communal gratitude and purification. Berries, too, held deep symbolic meaning. In some traditions, a special drink or sauce made from the first berries of the season was used in ceremonies to celebrate the return of summer's abundance. The deep red or blue color of the berries could represent life,
vitality, or a connection to the earth. Even something as simple as a nut could have a ceremonial role. In certain rituals, perfectly formed nuts might be used as offerings, placed on an altar, or given to the fire as a gift to the spirits. The act of sharing a specific type of nut among participants could symbolize unity and shared purpose. The preparation of these ceremonial foods was itself a ritual. It was done with great care, mindfulness, and often with prayers or songs. The people preparing the food were not just cooks, they were participants in a sacred act. The energy and intention they put into the food were believed to become part of it, to be consumed by those who ate it. These special snacks were not for quieting a rumbling stomach on a long journey. They were for feeding the spirit, for reinforcing social and sacred bonds, and for marking the most important moments in the life of the individual and the community. They were a tangible, edible expression of faith, gratitude, and connection.
Snack sharing and social life, bonds strengthened by food. In a world without endless distractions, social life revolved around direct human connection, around conversation, storytelling, and shared activities. And at the heart of much of this social life was the sharing of food, especially the small, informal bites we call snacks. The act of giving and receiving food was a fundamental social glue, a way of building and maintaining relationships. Imagine an evening in the village. The day's main work is done, and people are gathered around a central fire. The light flickers on their faces as a storyteller recounts an ancient myth. As he speaks, someone passes around a basket of freshly roasted squash seeds. People take a small handful, the quiet crunch of the seeds providing a subtle, rhythmic accompaniment to the story. The shared snack creates a sense of ease and community, a feeling of being part of a single, connected group. If a visitor arrived from another village, one of the first acts of hospitality would be to offer them something to eat. It might not be a full, formal meal, but a simple offering: a warm corn cake, a piece of dried jerky, or a bowl of berry preserves. This offering was a sign of welcome, a non-verbal way of saying, "You are safe here, and we share what we have with you." Accepting and eating the offered snack was a way of accepting that hospitality and establishing a bond of trust. Sharing snacks was also a part of daily work. A group of women sitting together, weaving baskets or preparing hides might share a bowl of nuts or a piece of acorn bread. The food would be passed from hand to hand, a simple act that eased the monotony of the work and strengthened the camaraderie of the group. It turned a chore into a social occasion. For children, sharing was learned from the very beginning. If a child found a small patch of berries, they would often call to their friends to come and share in the discovery. This was not always explicitly taught, it was simply the way things were done. The resources of the community were, in many ways, for the benefit of all. This culture of sharing meant that no one with neighbors would go hungry. If one family had a successful hunt, they would share the meat. If another had a bountiful harvest of beans, they would share with others. This extended to the daily snacks. Generosity was a highly valued trait, and hoarding was looked down upon. The simple act of offering a piece of what you were eating to the person next to you was a constant, small-scale reinforcement of the community's interdependence. Food was the currency of social connection. It was used to welcome strangers, to comfort friends, to celebrate joys, and to make work more pleasant. The humble snack, passed from one hand to another, was one of the most powerful tools for weaving the intricate and resilient fabric of social life. Natural preservation, drying, smoking, and storage. Survival, especially in climates with harsh winters, depended entirely on the ability to preserve the abundance of the warmer months.
The techniques for doing so were ingenious, relying on the natural properties of the sun, air, smoke, and earth to create a well-stocked pantry that could last for months. This foresight was the foundation of the entire food system. Drying was the most common and widespread method of preservation. It works by removing the water from food, which inhibits the growth of the bacteria and mold that cause spoilage. We have spoken of sun drying for jerky and fish, but this technique was applied to almost everything. Slices of squash and pumpkin were laid out on racks to dry until they were leathery and hard. Berries were spread on hides in the sun until they became like small, chewy raisins. Even corn was preserved through drying, either on the cob or as parched kernels. The key was good air circulation and protection from moisture and pests. Smoking, as we've explored with fish and jerky, was a more active form of drying. The smoke from a low, smoldering fire not only helped to dehydrate the food, but also deposited a layer of natural chemical compounds on its surface. These compounds have antimicrobial and antioxidant properties, giving the food a much longer shelf life and, of course, a delicious, smoky flavor. For foods that couldn't be dried, such as nuts and roots, the solution was cool, dark, and dry storage. Pits were often dug deep in the ground below the frost line. These pits were carefully lined with grass, bark, or clay to keep out moisture and rodents. They acted as natural root cellars. The harvested nuts, acorns, and root vegetables, like cattail tubers or wild potatoes, were layered inside. The pit was then sealed over and its location carefully marked. These underground caches kept the food cool and safe throughout the winter, ready to be dug up as needed. Fat was also a crucial preservative. Pemmican is the ultimate example. Pounded dried meat and berries were mixed with an equal amount of melted, rendered fat from buffalo or bear. As the mixture cooled, the fat solidified, encasing the meat and berries in an airtight, waterproof seal. This incredibly dense and high-energy food was practically immune to spoilage and could last for years, making it the perfect provision for long-distance travel or warfare. These methods, drying, smoking, pit storage, and fat rendering, were born from millennia of observation and experimentation. They were a testament to a deep understanding of the natural processes of decay and preservation. They represented the critical link between the seasons of plenty and the seasons of scarcity, a quiet, intelligent system that ensured the community's well-being and turned the fleeting bounty of summer into the enduring comfort of winter.
The flavors of native snacks are earthy, sweet, and nutty. Let us pause for a moment and simply consider the tastes themselves. If we could assemble a palette of the flavors that defined these native snacks, it would be one of deep, natural complexity, far removed from the artificial and overwhelming flavors of our modern world. It would be a taste of the earth, the forest, and the sun. The foundational flavor for many was the earthy, starchy sweetness of corn. Whether it was the toasty, nutty taste of parched corn, the clean, mild flavor of hominy, or the dense, smoky taste of ash-baked cornbread, the essence of corn was a constant, comforting presence. It was the flavor of home and sustenance. Alongside corn was the earthy bitterness and richness of the acorn. The taste of acorn bread or mush was more complex than that of corn, deeply nutty, with a subtle, pleasant astringency that spoke of the ancient oak trees from which it came. It was a grounding, substantial flavor. The nutty flavors were a category unto themselves. There was the rich, almost buttery taste of roasted pinon nuts and hickory nuts, the sharper, more pungent and oily flavor of the black walnut, the mild, sweet crunch of the roasted sunflower or squash seed. Each nut and seed carried the unique taste of its parent plant,
a concentrated burst of protein and fat that was both delicious and deeply satisfying. The sweet flavors came directly from nature, unrefined and full of character. There was the woody, complex sweetness of maple syrup, a taste that was both sweet and savory. And there was the floral, almost perfumed sweetness of wild honey, its flavor a map of the local blossoms. The sweetness of fruit was rarely just sweet. It was balanced by a wild tartness, the tang of a wild plum, the sharp bite of a cranberry, the deep, wine-like flavor of a cooked chokecherry. These were flavors with an edge, bright and alive. The savory notes were dominated by the taste of wild game and fish, enhanced by the magic of fire. The smoky, salty, and chewy flavor of jerky was the taste of the hunt and of preservation. The delicate, fragrant smokiness of alder-smoked salmon was the taste of the river and the coast. These were clean, profound flavors, seasoned with the wild herbs of the landscape, the sharp note of wild onion, the cool hint of mint, the herbaceous perfume of sage. These were the dominant flavors, earthy, nutty, tangy, smoky, and naturally sweet. They were subtle, honest, and deeply connected to their source. To taste these snacks was to taste the land itself, the soil, the trees, the rivers, and the sunshine. It was a simple, wholesome, and profoundly beautiful culinary world.
Seasonal snacks, following nature's calendar. The concept of a single year-round menu of snacks would have been entirely foreign. The foods that were available, and therefore the snacks that were eaten, were dictated by the great, slow-turning wheel of the seasons. Life was lived in accordance with nature's calendar, and the palate changed as the earth changed. Spring was a time of renewal and fresh, green flavors. After a long winter of relying on dried and preserved foods, the first green shoots were a celebrated treat. The snacks of spring were tender and vibrant. Fiddlehead ferns, tightly coiled and tasting of asparagus and the forest floor. The crisp, watery stalks of cattails and the tender shoots of milkweed. Wild onions and ramps with their sharp, pungent bite. These were often eaten raw or lightly cooked, a fresh, cleansing taste after the heavy foods of winter. Early berries, like strawberries, would also make their first appearance, a sweet promise of the abundance to come. Summer was a season of riotous abundance. The sun was high and the world was bursting with life. This was the peak season for berries of all kinds. Blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, and huckleberries. They were eaten by the handful, fresh and warm from the sun. The gardens were producing summer squash, its blossoms sometimes fried into a delicate, crispy snack. Fish were plentiful in the rivers and lakes, and fresh, grilled fish was a common, simple meal or snack. The flavors of summer were sweet, juicy, and immediate. Autumn was the season of harvest and preparation. The air grew crisp, and the flavors became richer and more earthy. This was the time for nuts. Acorns, hickory nuts, walnuts, and chestnuts were gathered and processed. The great corn harvest came in, providing the raw material for the corn cakes, breads, and porridges that would sustain them through the winter. Squash and pumpkins were harvested, their seeds roasted for a crunchy snack, and their flesh cooked down or dried. The flavors of autumn were nutty, smoky, and substantial. It was a time of gathering in, of building up stores for the cold months ahead. Winter was a time of rest, reflection, and reliance on preserved foods. The landscape was quiet and often covered in snow. The snacks of winter were the fruits of the previous season's labor. Strips of dried jerky,
tough and savory. Handfuls of dried berries, their summer sweetness now concentrated and chewy. Dense, dark breads made from stored acorn or corn flour. A warm bowl of hominy soup, simmering constantly over the fire. Nuts from the storage pit. The flavors of winter were deep, savory, and comforting. They were a reminder of the foresight and hard work that made survival possible. A taste of stored sunshine in the heart of the cold. This seasonal flow of food created a diet that was constantly changing, always interesting and perfectly in tune with the rhythms of the natural world.
Evening calm, closing the day with full bellies and peaceful dreams. The sun has long since set, its final embers of orange and purple faded from the western sky. The village is now bathed in the soft silver light of the moon and the flickering warm glow of the central fire. The day, with its work, its play, and its small, nourishing snacks, is coming to a close. The air is cool and still, carrying the scent of wood smoke and the distant rhythmic chirping of crickets. The boisterous energy of the day has given way to a deep and settled calm. Families are gathered in their lodges, the sounds of quiet conversation and perhaps a softly sung lullaby drifting through the night. The last snack of the day might have been a simple one, a small piece of leftover cornbread or a handful of nuts from a pouch. Perhaps a warm drink, a tea made from mint or raspberry leaves, soothing and fragrant. It is not a large meal, but a final comforting bite to settle the stomach and signal to the body that it is time for rest. There is a profound sense of security in this evening calm. It is the security of a full belly, not from an overly indulgent feast, but from the steady, reliable sustenance of the day's simple foods. The corn, the beans, the nuts, the jerky. They have provided the energy for the day's tasks, and their memory provides a sense of well-being that lulls the mind toward sleep. As you lie down on your soft bed of furs or woven mats, you can feel the gentle weight of a body well-nourished and a mind at peace. The rhythmic sounds of the village become a kind of gentle music, the crackle of the dying fire, the soft murmur of voices, the sigh of the wind in the trees. There are no pressing anxieties about what tomorrow will bring. The storage pits are full, the jerky is dry, and the corn is stored. The community is strong, its bonds reinforced by the thousand small acts of sharing that took place throughout the day. The world is in its proper order. Allow your own breathing to align with this slow, peaceful rhythm. Feel the comfort of your bed, the quiet of the room. Let the stories of these simple, wholesome snacks fill your mind. The earthy taste of acorn bread, the sweet burst of a wild berry, the savory chew of jerky. These are the flavors of a life lived in balance, a life of quiet sufficiency. And with these peaceful thoughts, allow yourself to drift away into a deep and restful sleep, your dreams as calm and nourishing as the world we have just visited. Good night.